What is up, friends? Shalom, shalom, and welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I thank you guys for watching this. If you are watching it live, those of you who are not watching this live, obviously, I thank you for tuning in anyways. We have a very interesting program for you guys here today. I want to, of course, make sure that I actually am live at the moment. So if you guys would just give me one moment while I allow people to get into the live chat and also make sure that we actually are live. Once again, sorry about that. Alrighty, so it looks like we are actually live at the moment. Awesome. Thank you, friends. Once again, thank you for joining us here today on this episode of the Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox. I see Jeremy Martin there is in the live chat. Hopefully we get a few other guys here in as well. Looks like we only got the one, but I did not actually pre-announce this, so I'm terrible at advertising myself, so I apologize. Nonetheless, we got an interesting show for you today. Once again, brief clarification for those who need a brief reminder. Watchdog is my podcast discussing news and politics and things of that nature. This will not have anything to do with apologetics. That is unapologetics. Those are posted on weekends. With that clarification in mind, once again, welcome, friends. The subject matter at hand today, as is starting to become somewhat of a theme in the news, unfortunately, is somewhat depressing, a little bit heavy. I'm not going to pretend that, I have some great, speech at the end to make everybody feel better. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, and this is my pre-article discussion for today, I think there's some rough times ahead for us. And I actually don't really think it matters necessarily how things play out from here on out. Let me explain. If it turns out that the election was stolen from Donald Trump and he wins in court, we are still going to have something like a leftist uprising as a result, because they will not believe what the courts say in this particular instance, just like the right is not going to believe what the courts say if they rule against Donald Trump. So we have to deal with that also, regardless of what happens. We also have to deal with the fact that, of course, Kamala Harris, and everybody says Joe Biden's the president, but it's really Kamala, is completely and utterly insane. We have to deal with the fact that we're going to have COVID lockdowns again. We have to deal with the fact that people want national mandates of vaccines and of masks and so on. People are talking about using drones to enforce social distancing. We're talking about getting involved in a lot of United Nations programs, things like the Great Reset, things like denuclearization. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks, because there will be a return to the Iran deal if Kamala Harris is in office. There will be a return to the Paris Climate Accord. The Green New Deal will be looked at, right? And the Equal Rights Amendment will be looked at. You guys need to understand this, and you need to not live, and I'm not saying anybody necessarily is, but I just want to burst bubbles just in case they exist. You need to not live in a bubble right now, because things are about to get heavy, all right, in this country. That it is, at this point, I don't see how it's avoidable. And we're going to get into a lot of the details here, but I just want you guys to know, that there is hope, of course. That hope, there is a little hope on the earth, I will say, right? It is possible for this nation to change, but in my personal opinion, the primary hope needs to be in Jesus. That is at all times, but especially right now, because I fear we are nearing the end of this country. And we're going to see a lot of the reasons why here today. So I want to jump right into some of it. Now, we need to, before we get into the United States, actually look at Europe. And the reason we need to look at Europe is because Europe has, for whatever reason, managed to be ahead of the curve as far as tyranny is concerned, as it pertains to the United States. I know that's probably a weird terminology to use, but if you look at virtually everything that goes on in Europe, whether it be hate speech law, whether it be the forcible acceptance of jihadi terrorism, whether it be the crackdown on religious fundamentalism, whether it be the censorship of speech online, so on and so forth. A lot of those things, they tend to get popular in the West before they get popular in the United States. And what's the West minus the United States? Well, it's basically Europe and Canada, right? And we have seen some pretty rough things from Europe so far. By the way, I just saw Brother Nicholas here in the live chat as well. Shalom, brother. And I want to show you guys what's been going on in Europe, because I firmly believe that it will potentially be coming to see us as well. Maybe not everywhere. Perhaps some local states, state governments, right, and city governments can put up some kind of a fight. We'll see, of course, what happens. But in certain areas, this is absolutely about to happen. Places like California, places like New York, places like Michigan. We're in for a rough time ahead, right? And potentially the entire nation. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into a lot of this. Got to pull up a banner here for you guys and share my screen and all that. By the way, if you see that Patreon down there, I forgot to drop that. Sorry. If you see that Patreon down there, patreon.com/thesynagogue, if you'd like to support this podcast or my other podcast, please do check that out. If you can't support in that way, please do like, share, subscribe, comment, any of that sort of stuff. And of course, we'll be sure to reiterate that again at the end of the show. So the first topic that I have today, COVIDiocy has turned into Coronaarchy. Now, many of you may recall the term or meme, as it might be properly termed, COVIDiocy or COVIDiot, right? Mixing, of course, the words COVID with the word idiot or idiocy, and implying that people have lost their ever-loving minds over this virus, which is, of course, just objectively the case. Well, COVIDiocy has managed to morph and become something much more dangerous, and that is Coronaarchy. For those of you who are unaware, the word archy refers to, the Greek word archy, right, refers to a system of governance, right? And at this point, Coronaarchy would imply that we are literally being ruled by coronavirus. And at least on the surface, that is what it seems to, that is what seems to be the case, right? Now, of course, we know we are actually ruled by people with agendas, right? But they are masking their agendas here with the coronavirus and, justifying everything under the sun by virtue of the fact that there is a coronavirus, despite the fact that there's, of course, tons of evidence that, things like masks don't work, that, there could be some issues with the vaccines, that the virus is overblown. The CDC themselves admitted that only 6% of COVID deaths actually are solely attributable to COVID. You can find that on the CDC website, by the way. But nonetheless, the facts be damned. Governments want to use coronavirus in order to push forward their different agendas. And sometimes their agendas don't necessarily agree with each other, but what they do agree with each other on is that coronavirus is a very useful tool to push these agendas. And so I have termed the recent, flush of lockdowns and, government mandates and all that kind of stuff that's going across the world, Coronaarchy. COVIDiocy has turned into a Coronaarchy. Now I'm going to share some videos with you guys. And these videos are kind of rough, actually. They suck to watch. And they kind of put a little bit of fear inside you. Why do I say that? Well, because people across the world are currently experiencing real tyrannies, like actual tyrannies, not like the tyrannies that we have experienced in the past where you were forced to hire somebody, right? Or where you were being censored in your speech or something like that, right? Which are tyrannies, don't get me wrong. They were the pre-tyrannies, right? And everybody warned that it gets worse after that. The thing is at least in Europe, we are at the worst after that, right? We're here now. This is from the Insider paper. German police arrest lockdown critic Dr. Andreas Nowak in a shocking video. As we're going to see in this article, the reason for the arrest was because he was accused of helping lockdown protesters with their medical emergencies, right? Because as everybody's firmly aware, riot police can sometimes hurt you pretty bad. And rioters, obviously, can also hurt you pretty bad. So he was offering support to these protesters. And as a result of offering this medical support, the German government decided that he was a threat. So he was live streaming and he's discussing, some of these stuff about COVID. It just so happens that he is a COVID skeptic, right? And this is what ends up occurring. Let's go ahead and watch. Oh, hang on. Did I share the audio? Shoot. 1 second, friends. I don't know if I shared my audio. Share screen. Share audio. All right, here we go. Back in business. My apologies. So let's check this out.
Parallel gleichzeitig. Jede Wirklichkeit Entschuldigung, Entschuldigung kurz. Entschuldigung, hier, die Polizei ist gerade da. Die Polizei ist gerade da.
So you can hear they start knocking at his door, right?
Ja.
Und jetzt?
Mach mal bitte auf. Ja, ich weiß nicht, was los ist.
Das ist doch gerade ein
Ich weiß nicht.
Guck mal, wir haben vorhin über Angst gesprochen.
Moment, hier ist gerade die Polizei, bricht gerade die Tür auf. Polizei! Ich will die Hände sehen! Auf den Boden, runter, beide! Runter auf den Boden!
Like he's some kind of terrorist. Look at this. And thank the Lord he happened to be live streaming, right?
Am Boden liegen bleiben. Wie sind Ihre Namen? Wie heißen Sie? Wie heißen Sie? Ich bin Andreas.
And of course, not that the German government is necessarily, you know, lacking any experience in how to run a fascistic, totalitarian regime, right? But nonetheless, you see here, and of course, you got to take that down, right? We got to make sure nobody's watching this. They go in, they bust down his door, they arrest him. Just so happens that he's a COVID skeptic, which may or may not be coincidence. I don't think it is. But nonetheless, let's read a little bit. Why is he arrested? Reports from Germany indicate that a German doctor, Dr. Andreas Nowak, was arrested during a police raid while he was recording a live video. The reason for the police raid and arrest of the German doctor has not been officially revealed yet. However, there are rumors that Dr. Andreas Nowak provided medical assistance to hundreds of protesters during lockdown protests against the administration. Reports also indicate that Dr. Andreas Nowak was under investigation by the authorities for being non-compliant with COVID-19 lockdown laws enacted by the German government. Some people speculate that there could be more to it than is known presently. The arrest was made after the German parliament passed the infection protection law. In the live stream, police can be heard banging furiously on the door of the place where Dr. Andreas Nowak was broadcasting. It's the police, a man can be heard saying off camera in panic. The video then shows police barging into the building, forcing Dr. Andreas Nowak to the ground. The police then proceed to turn off his live stream. People who were watching the live stream are currently speculating the reasons for arrest. Quote, I think the guy is guilty of expressing his opinions, end quote, said one user. And of course, that's just the opinion of a user. Another one says this has happened to Dr. Andreas Nowak in Germany after the unconstitutional approval of the infection law. Police broke into his house while he was having a live stream transmission on YouTube. Those who cried against fascism have created the most criminal dictatorship in history. And of course, that's obviously an exaggeration, but you get the idea, right? They're certainly not happy with what's going on. Another user said shocking footage out of Germany shows Dr. Andreas Nowak being raided by armed police in the middle of a live stream for apparently violating coronavirus laws, end quote. The manner in which the arrest was made is extremely unethical. Armed police just yell at Andreas Nowak till he settles on the ground. The police do not state their reasons for arresting him, nor do they show any valid arrest warrants. Arrests such as these are blatant violations of due process. Every citizen has the right to security against arbitrary arrests. To be fair, I'm not hugely familiar on German law, so I don't know if that's a legal right that they have in Germany. It's certainly a human right, so I agree with the article writer there, and it would absolutely be a legal right here in the States, but nonetheless, I'm just not too familiar with how their laws work. At any rate, one user tweeted, German Dr. Andreas Nowak raided by armed police during YouTube stream and arrested inside his home for breaking COVID laws. He is just anti-lockdown expressing his views. Fight back, people. If you don't know, it will be too late later, blah, 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 right? So you get these guys, they're all commenting on here, but you see the video for yourself, right? And this isn't the only thing that's going on here. This is just one of the things that's going on here. It just so happens that in another place, different nation, but obviously still happening in this country, or in this world rather, right? Still happening in the West, even in places that we consider to be our allies and places that we take influence from. Worshippers warned to abide by COVID restrictions by police in Britain. And this is from metro.co.uk. Jen Mills is the writer. Sorry, let me get this earwax ad out of here. It's disgusting. I apologize, friends. Worshippers from faith communities across London have been urged to abide by the coronavirus restrictions after police broke up a baptism service with around 30 people attending. Metro Police Commander Catherine Roper said, quote, "We know that the overwhelming majority of faith communities in London have made incredible sacrifices and found new ways, such as online meetings, to continue services and keep their patrons safe. Upsettingly, however, there have been small pockets, upsettingly, right? She doesn't approve of this. There have been small pockets where religious venues have breached the regulations, potentially putting people in danger of spreading the virus. Oh, you people, how dare you go to church and worship your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? How dare you baptize people into the faith? How dare you go and have communion with your brothers and sisters in Christ? We, the government, daddy government, have decided that you are not allowed to do so. Very upset, very disappointed in you. Ought to scold you and put you in the corner, Mr. Christian, Mr. and Mrs. Christian. It's just ridiculous, dude. It's nonsense. Anyways, this is deeply regrettable, and in the interest of public safety, we have attended those incidents and ensured the crowds are dispersed, using quite literally the force of government to violate people's right to worship. As our city continues our collective fight against the virus, I would urge places of worship and faith communities across London to observe the current restrictions, which include faith venues being available for independent prayer only. This is prayer that is not congregational or communal. Excuse me. Can you guys hear this ad? I hope not. This is prayer that is not congregational or communal, and so these cannot be led by a religious leader. However, there must be a risk assessment in place to show how this can be managed safely. It comes after police officers stepped in to break up baptism services being held with around 30 people during the national lockdown. The service was taking place at the Evangelical Angel Church in North London. And this is coming soon to a city near you, friends. Believe me, if any of my audience here is American, which I know most of my audience is, this is coming to you. I promise. I guarantee it. It's already happened in some instances. Even here in the state of Idaho, where I live, one of the most red states in the country, there was arrests of people for having the audacity to sing outside amongst fellow believers in Christ hymns to their Lord and Savior. That happened in Idaho. Red state, super conservative, loves liberty, allegedly. You think it won't happen in California? You think it won't happen in Washington? You think it won't happen in New York? It is right around the corner, friends. And we need to wake up to it. Not wake up to it because we can stop it, because frankly, I don't know that we can. But we need to at least be prepared for it. We need to be in the right place spiritually. We need to be in the right place. And by the way, I understand this is supposed to be more of a secular broadcast. I've been told by many that it would behoove me to maybe make this more of a faith-oriented, but still political broadcast. And to be frank, I don't disagree with these people. So that might be the route we're going, but I digress. We need to be in a proper state of mind. We need to be in a proper place spiritually. We need to be in, expecting the things that are coming. We need to hopefully be prepared in any way that we can, because these things are coming like a 500,000 ton bag of bricks to smack you right in the face, my friends. And there is no stopping it at this point. Barring a miracle from God, there is no stopping it at this point. Lead pastor Reagan King, 28 years old, said he wanted to hold the baptism in defiance of the restrictions because he served a greater good. Amen. 2 police vans and a police car were parked outside the church's Mount Zion Hall building in Clerkenwell, while around 4 officers stood at the entrance to stop people from entering. Mr. King said, quote, "We were told not to have a baptism and police began to block people from entering the church, so we decided to make other arrangements. There were 20 people here initially and it built up to about 30, end quote. Asked why he had decided to breach the restrictions, Mr. King said, quote, "Because I believe we serve a greater good. We have a greater good than whatever this is," end quote. And I completely agree. And by the way, even if I didn't agree, even if I was an atheist, belief in freedom dictates that I should agree that he has that right, at least. Referring to the police presence, he said, quote, "This is not something I ever wanted. This is an essential service that we provide. It's about loving our neighbor, and you can talk with a number of people here who are extremely vulnerable, homeless, or on the verge of being very isolated," end quote. Police allowed 15 people to remain inside the church, while another 15 took part in a socially distanced outdoor service nearby. A 22-year-old man from Lambeth who took part in the outdoor service but did not want to be named said, quote, while the restrictions allow people to go to the supermarket to get food, I think there needs to be consideration for spiritual food as well, end quote. And of course, you know, he talks about the grocery markets. I'd like to take it a step further, ladies and gentlemen. Pornography stores are open. Marijuana dispensaries are open. Liquor stores are open. Tobacco shops are open. Brothels are open. Strip clubs are open. But for some reason, you can't go to church. Amongst some other things, because, you know, I'm a little bit annoyed with their attack on restaurants and movie theaters, amongst other things as well. But just keep those things in mind. It's totally cool to go have sex with some random woman for money in the states where prostitution is legal, at least, which I believe is only New Jersey and Nevada. But not cool to go to church. It's okay to go watch a girl get naked for you and strip, potentially not even 18 years old, because we know how bad trafficking is in this country. Not cool to go to church. It's cool to go get smashed drunk and go buy a blunt afterwards. It's not cool to go to church. Also, a bunch of states wouldn't let you vote in person, but whatever. I digress. He said during the outdoor service, worshippers prayed for the police, press, and the people who wanted to shut down the meeting. A Met spokesperson said officers spoke with the pastor following reports he intended to hold a baptism and an in-person service. The spokesperson said, quote, officers explained that due to COVID-19 restrictions, restrictions are in place preventing gatherings and that financial penalties can be applied if they are breached. The pastor agreed not to proceed with the baptism or the in-person indoor service. A brief socially distanced A brief socially distanced outdoor gathering was held instead, which was agreed to by officers as a sensible compromise in the circumstances, which, to be fair, credit to those officers for not being totally tyrannical, just a little bit tyrannical. A support group for vulnerable adults was permitted to proceed as normal, as was in line with the relevant legislation, and end quote there. Real quick, I just want to check some of the comments. So yeah, this is some of the stuff that we've been having going on in Europe, right? And it's not the only things that are going on in Europe by any stretch of the imagination. Kent Hovind says that COVID stands for Certificate of Vaccination ID. That would be kind of a, I don't know, that's a funny little, I don't know. Kent Hovind has some interesting eschatological beliefs that I don't know if I necessarily buy into, but that is an interesting anagram nonetheless. I don't think anagram is the right word. Acronym, sorry. At any rate, there is more stuff going on than even that, right? And shalom Mindbreaker, shalom Flash Gordon, shalom Jeremy. Very much love to see you guys all here. Please throw a like or share on this if you have not done so. Very important information that certainly needs to get out to the masses. Also going on in Europe, though, protests are erupting all over. This is from Silver Doctors. Protests are up all over Europe as governments reimpose coronavirus lockdowns. It's happening in Italy. It's happening in France. Happening in Germany. Happening in Britain. And this is via Natural News from Arsenio Toledo. While all the specifics of the lockdowns vary per nation, all reintroduced lockdowns feature tough curbs on ... European workers and businessmen are taking to the streets to protest the reimposition of Wuhan coronavirus lockdowns by their governments in the face of the second wave of coronavirus infections in the region. While the specifics of the lockdown vary per nation, all reintroduced lockdown feature a tough curb on the freedoms of movement and assembly, as well as, of course, your right to work and right to vote, freedom of religion, so on and so forth. Just want to go ahead and add those things there. Many businesses in Europe reluctantly agreed to abide by lengthy lockdowns earlier this year when the first cases of the coronavirus started spreading like wildfire through Europe. However, these same business owners and workers have now come around to understanding that perhaps another heavy lockdown is not the right way to combat the spread of COVID-19 through their communities. And of course, it is just a absolutely miserable way to manage your economy as well. Protests erupting all over Europe against lockdowns. Some have turned violent. In France, many small business owners, sometimes backed by their mayors and other municipal officials, are complaining about the supposed injustice being done to them by President Emmanuel Macron's government. They argue that the restrictions being imposed are detrimental to small businesses while advantageous for big chain stores and online retailers like Amazon. And of course, the facts have shown this to be 100% the case. You guys can go ahead and look at the net worth of all of the richest people, whether it be Zuckerberg, the owners of Alphabet, Jeff Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, Elon Musk, right? They all got richer. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, right? They all got richer. While tons of small businesses collapsed, while the restaurant industry collapsed, while it looks like we may actually literally see the end of the movie industry as we know it, by which I mean movie theaters, and so on and so forth, right? These men got billions and billions and billions of dollars. Just to give you some examples. Jeff Bezos had something like 80 million, 90 million, or billion, dollars at the beginning of this year. That was primarily due to a divorce. He actually got a lot of his income taken by his ex-wife as a result of this divorce. He is now already back up to like $170 billion in just 1 year. What about Elon Musk? Elon Musk had a net worth of about $21 billion in 2019. His net worth is about $90 billion right now. So on and so forth. People are projecting that we might see a third company, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this third company was going to be Amazon, that will crack $1 trillion in worth. The third company will be joining Apple and Alphabet, if I'm remembering correctly. And if there's somebody who can, correct the particulars of that as far as which businesses it is, just in case I am wrong, I would appreciate that. But nonetheless, right, the rich are getting richer, and exponentially so. While the unemployment rate goes up, while the rate of people who are on unemployment goes up, while the debt goes up, while the median wage goes down, while inflation rises, while prices skyrocket, etc., and etc. So these business owners are exactly correct. To appease these small business owners, French Minister to Finance Bruno Le Maire said that supermarkets and online retailers will be treated similarly to small shops. However, this has not deterred the protests, and also it's just not been the case, which have already erupted in France despite the new lockdowns coming with generous economic safety nets. Which, guys, you need to understand something. These economic safety nets are sweet nothings whispered into your ear. They are platitudes. First off, many people don't even receive them. As a matter of fact, I, as a married man, was supposed to receive a $2,400 stimulus check. I did not receive that $2,400 stimulus check. I did not receive a $1,200 stimulus check. I did not even receive, my federal tax return, for crying out loud. So, like, the government just doesn't function properly. And the reason is due to some stupid health insurance stuff that I got to figure out, which I will, to be fair. But nonetheless, you get the idea, right? How many other people have something that they miss, they didn't even know they miss, right? And as a result, they don't even receive these things. How many people have something where it gets lost in the mail or something along those lines? How many people get it too late? Hey, sorry, business already went under. Doesn't really matter, right? But also, and much more importantly than that, you cannot print money ad infinitum. You cannot do it, okay? They are giving you money that does not exist, right? They pass legislation, and then they print this money, which did not exist before they passed that legislation. That is not a sustainable method of maintaining an economy. It just simply isn't, right? It causes debt to skyrocket. It causes the value of your dollar, or in this case, your euro or your pound, to go down dramatically. Inflation goes up, right? Obviously, the thing about, your debt going up too, that people need to realize is eventually people just stop giving you money, right? Your credit is worth nothing. And so on and so forth. And you guys can actually see this a little bit in some products that have kind of skyrocketed in price just in the last year alone. Eggs are roughly triple what they used to be. Milk is roughly double what it used to be just a year ago, right? Numerous other products I've gone on, 40, 50% in the cleaning product field, like, things like Lysol and stuff like that. And we constantly have shortages on them. This is only the beginning, my friends. You can't just dump a whole bunch of money in. And in fact, let me give you a perfect example. Why is gold valuable? Because it's rare, right? Gold is valuable because it is rare. So if you have a lot of gold, does gold maintain the same value? Like if everybody has a lot of gold, I mean, right? If everybody in the town has a lot of gold. No, of course not. Because you have 100 pieces of gold. Well, I also have 100 pieces of gold. And Bob down the block also has 100 pieces of gold. And Frank on the side of him has 100 pieces of gold. It doesn't matter anymore. 100 pieces of gold is the new standard, right? In this case, you can theoretically do that and continuously inflate these this currency, the dollar, right, or the euro, ad infinitum, because it is literally paper. You can continuously print it. But the thing is, you can't realistically print it ad infinitum because eventually your dollar is worth absolutely nothing. And this is where the old wheelbarrows of money cliche comes from, right, from places like Venezuela and Germany. And it can happen here, friends. It absolutely can happen here, right? After this year and all of the extremely ridiculous and stupid stimulus packages that we, the United States, passed, we're going to be something like $30 trillion in debt. By the way, here's a fun fact for you. That will absolutely, positively, guaranteed never be paid. If you think it will, you need to re-examine what $30 trillion is. And in fact, let me give you a little bit, before I go back to the article, this is the last thing I'll say on this little rant. Let me give you a little bit of a illustration that my grandfather always used to give me, right, and still does. How long do you think a trillion seconds is? Do you think it's 10 years? Do you think it's 100 years? Do you think it's 1,000 years? No. 32,000 years. Let me say that again. 32,000 years. That is the length of 1 trillion seconds in time. Ladies and gentlemen, civilization as a whole has not existed for 1 trillion seconds. The human race as we know it, even according to a lot of evolutionist standards, which I say because I am a creationist, as some people who watch my apologetics may know, has not existed. If you were to translate each individual dollar we are in debt into a second, has not existed for that length of time. Which, if I am correct, it would be about 960,000 years. Or maybe has barely existed for that amount of time. I guess perhaps somebody who's a little bit more familiar with evolutionary biology could potentially correct me there. I guess I'm, a little bit ignorant on that. My understanding is that it's somewhere between 100 and 500,000 years that humanity has been Homo sapiens sapien according to their model. But I digress. Just to give you an illustration as to what a trillion is, we owe 30 of those 32,000 year spans if each individual dollar was a second. That's not payable. It's just simply not payable. And nonetheless, I got to get back to this because I do absolutely need to keep this roughly an hour. So let's get back into the article. I'm sorry. Just the point being, these quote-unquote generous safety nets, they don't mean anything. They just collapse your economy. They devalue your dollar. They cause prices to skyrocket. And this is basic economics 101 that people have been very well aware of for millennia at this point. But I digress. This has not deterred the protesters, which have already erupted in France despite blah, blah, blah. In cities like Paris, Toulouse, and Castries. I'm not sure how you say that one. Small protests of around 100 people have already popped up. In Castries, local shopkeepers, protesting held up a banner that read, "Upright today, on our knees tomorrow." Quote, "What we want is not just aid money," said Francis Palimbi, president of the Confederation of French Traders. "We want, above all, to open, end quote." Completely with you there, brother. In Italy, Parliament approved the renewed lockdown restrictions, which force cinemas, theaters, and gyms to close, and bars and restaurants to shut down after 6 p.m. Because apparently the virus stops getting people sick between the hours of, I guess, I don't know when it starts, but we'll say 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. That's when the virus stops getting people sick. But after 6 p.m., you see coronavirus is all of a sudden a lot stronger for some reason. They figured this out at Science University of Science, right? And of course, I'm being sarcastic. It's literally ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever. The government has also looked at introducing a national 9 p.m. curfew, banning travel between regions, and shuttering shopping malls during the weekends. Right, because the virus is apparently worse during the weekends when everybody wants to go to the shopping mall, right? That's, of course, the times that are most profitable for the shopping mall. So let's just go ahead and destroy the shopping mall, which, by the way, happens to be something that Amazon has been doing for quite some time. Now they're being helped by different governments, across the world, which there may or may not be a conspiracy there. I don't know. I kind of think there is, but I digress. And not, by the way, not just with Amazon, but with all these corporate hacks, right? Disney, Viacom, CNN, Kraft, Monsanto, etc. This has led to a wave of protest all over the country, including in some of Italy's largest cities. In turn, taxi drivers occupied the city's central square. In Cremona, restaurant owners conducted a noise barrage by beating their pots and pans. Business owners have raised banners and chanted slogans, such as "Work is our right" and "If you close us down, you pay up." One businessman in Milan told, this is going to be terrible pronunciation, I'm sorry, Agence France Presse? I don't know. No clue. Probably terrible. I apologize. The government benefits don't always arrive, and if they do, it's never enough to keep the business afloat. Facts. He's also concerned, by the fact that no support is going to the large number of Italians working in the informal economy. It is funny how, since economies just function the same way, regardless of the ethnicity and social, cultural norms of a nation, that they all have the same problems, right? It's almost like it's just objectively the case that there's a right way to do economics and a wrong way to do economics. And it doesn't really matter what country you're in, but I digress. The protests have turned violent in the cities of Rome, Naples, Bologna? I did not know that there was a city called Bologna, but that is definitely how you spell the meat product bologna, so I'm going to go ahead and pronounce that bologna. And Turin. Here, riot police fired tear gas. I'm sorry for my ignorance on the pronunciation of that particular town. I really hope it's not Bologna, but nonetheless, here riot police fired tear gas into crowds while demonstrators threw bottles, rocks, and Molotov cocktails at police lines. In Spain, the center-left government reintroduced a nighttime curfew and locked down the borders between its 17 regions. This has also led to anti-lockdown protests, some of which turned violent, with instances of light property damage, such as vandalism, occurring in several cities. And there's a lot more that we could get into here. I'm going to provide links in the description. Probably we'll have them up by tonight. I don't know if they're actually up in now. They're probably not. But nonetheless, I just have some other articles I want to get to, but you guys get the idea, right? You're having these lockdowns all across. It's in France, it's in Germany, it's in Britain, it's in Spain, it's in Italy, and it's in many places here in the United States. It's in California, it's in New York, it's in Florida, it's in Texas even. You know what I mean? Here in Boise, right? I mean, and I don't know. To a certain extent, it's almost like, everything I say here is just mere breath. You know what I mean? Because to a certain extent, we are, I don't know, running headfirst into a brick wall, it seems, right? With no foreseeable escape. But I guess I will say the Lord has parted a Red Sea before. So we'll end that cynical thought there and move on to the rest of the news. So the next things we're going to go ahead and talk about. Check out some of you guys' comments here today. Next thing we're going to go ahead and talk about here today is the most shocking thing that has ever happened in the world, my friends. Shocking shocker shocks everyone ever. The arch-blasphemous Pope Francis doesn't like lockdown protesters. No freaking way! I was so shocked when I read this. You guys can't see my face, but it is the most shocking shocked face you've ever seen, I swear. Like, what else are you going to tell me, dude? That the sky is blue, that Mars is the red planet, that sand is on beaches? Like, duh. But nonetheless, it is important because he is obviously a very important person who has quite a sway on politics all across the world. There's something like 1 billion Catholics on the planet, right? And they definitely hang on a lot of his every word, even those who disagree with him, right? The Taylor Marshalls and the Matt Frauds and the Andrew Napolitanos of the world still have to hang on his every word to an extent, even if it is only to refute it. You know what I mean? Because he is the what do they call that? Primate, right? meaning he is the prime bishop. He is supreme, Pontifex Maximus. He is infallible even on some occasions. So they have to listen to this sort of stuff. And, well, I mean, it's important for the rest of us to know. I guess that's all I can say. I'm going to check out a few of these comments here real quick just to see what is going on in the comment section. Flash Gordon does ask me the question here. Is communism a form of feudalism? I do not believe that would be an accurate representation of communism. No, sir. Feudalism is much more monarchic, and feudalism a lot of times does actually have numerous market-based economies driving each of the individual duchies. There's a lot that could be said on that, but basically you could, in theory, be both communistic and feudalistic, absolutely. But there are no way requirements of each other. So we got a little bit of a back and forth between some gentlemen here. So on and so forth. All right. So let's get to the article at hand then. Pope book backs George Floyd, last virus skeptics. Which, by the way, another thing that's just immensely shocking, I know. The most liberal and Marxist pope in history doesn't really approve of the whole George Floyd thing. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. You shouldn't approve of the George Floyd thing. Though I don't think you could call it murdered. It was certainly manslaughter, right? And Derek Chauvin does need to be held accountable for that. But of course, hindsight is 2020, and we now know that George Floyd's death has been used to justify vile protests, disgusting communist leftism, the looting of people's businesses, and sometimes even the extermination of people's lives, right? But Pope Francis backs those protests. Those protests are totally cool. The virus protests, of course, those are not cool, right? Even though the George Floyd protests are just as much of a super spreader event or anything like that, if you want to call it that, whatever. I digress. We got to get to the article, right? I could rant forever. This is the Associated Press, Nicole Winfield, writing this article today, actually, the 23rd of November. Pope Francis is supporting demands for racial justice in the wake of U.S. police killing of George Floyd and is blasting COVID-19 skeptics and media organizations that spread their conspiracies in a new book penned during the Vatican's coronavirus lockdowns. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here just so you guys can actually read it on the screen as well. Because, what's the point of showing it on the screen if you can't read it, right? In Let Us Dream, Francis also criticizes populist politicians who whip up rallies in ways reminiscent of the 1930s and the hypocrisy of rigid conservative Catholics who support them. But he also criticizes the forceful downing of historic statues during protests for racial equality this year as a misguided attempt to purify the past, which, to be fair, give credit where credit is due. I do agree with Pope Francis on his position on statues. Putting that aside for a second, it is interesting that he calls out the quote-unquote rigid conservative Catholics, because not only are those Catholics much more biblical, and Catholicism in and of itself is abiblical, but they are at least closer to biblical Christianity than these progressive Catholics are. But they're definitely much more Catholic, right? People have famously said, is the Pope Catholic, as a way to just say, well, that's obvious, right? But people have also famously, as of the last 7 years, since Francis has taken the episcopacy of Rome, said, is the Pope Catholic, as a literal question, as in, I don't know. Is he? Maybe. Now, obviously, of course, that's a somewhat ridiculous question, because by definition, Catholicism is basically what the Pope decides it is, right? The Pope and the Church are the firm controllers of that religion, right? In the same way that Islam is the religion of Muhammad, and that Christianity is the religion of Jesus, and that Judaism is the religion of the rabbis, Catholicism is the religion of the papacy in Rome, right? But nonetheless, I just find that interesting, right? That he's going after those people. I also find it interesting that he is going after quote-unquote populist politicians who whip up rallies in ways reminiscent of the 1930s, which I can only assume is probably a dig at Donald Trump, although to be fair, it could potentially be a dig at the president of Brazil and the president of the Philippines, or even all of them. I don't really know. He refuses to actually name names, but of course, at this point, we know so many people have called Trump a fascist and a Nazi that just sounds like the kind of person, and rather, that just sounds like the kind of person Francis is. So we can kind of extrapolate from there that he's probably talking about President Trump. Too much of a coward to actually say any sort of a name or name a country, though. The 150-page book, due out December 1st, was ghostwritten by Francis's English language biographer, Austin Ivere. And at times, the prose and emphasis seems almost more Ivere's than Francis's. That's somewhat intentional. Ivere said Monday he hopes a more colloquial English-speaking pope will resonate with English-speaking readers and believers. I would also quickly point out that not only is this a way to sort of chameleonize, whatever you want to call it, right? Francis's rhetoric to be more culturally palatable to whatever culture he happens to be writing to, right? But on top of that, the more ambiguity and vagaries surrounding Francis's statements, the better. Because that means he can kind of finagle, well, what I really meant was this. And actually, this is the policy we're going with. And you see, I'm not really recanting. You just have to interpret it in this way, right? It's a very clever trick that politicians and priests have used for a long time. In fact, you see, Joe Biden kind of using it now, right? For example, when he said that he wouldn't pack the courts, he said either he wouldn't answer it or, that's just going to be the only thing that you guys talk about, right? Or anything like that, right? He's being vague about it. And other people say, oh, yeah, I support it. And other people say, no, Joe Biden's totally not for court packing, right? And they speak for Biden, but Biden kind of just says, well, I'm not gonna address that. I'm not gonna give that the time of day. You guys don't deserve to know, what have you, right? And of course, Trump does this too. That's just the first thing that popped into my mind. At its core, Let Us Dream aims to outline Francis's vision of a more economically and environmentally just post-coronavirus world, where the poor, the elderly, and the weak aren't left on the margins and the wealthy aren't consumed only with profits. You guys should check out my Great Reset episode of The Watchdog because he basically just endorsed it. And of course, we actually showed on that episode that he's one of the contributors to the Great Reset, so that's not in any way, shape, or form a surprise. It also offers a new personal insight into the 83-year-old Argentine Pope and his sense of humor. At one point, Francis revealed that after the 2012, he offered in 2012 to retire as Archbishop of Buenos Aires when he turned 75. He planned to finally finish the thesis he never completed on the 20th century German intellectual Romano Guardini. But in March 2013, I was transferred to another diocese. He deadpans. Francis was elected Pope on March 13th, 2013. By the way, I would recommend looking into Romano Guardini. Interesting that Francis is taking some influence from him. We should know the people who Francis takes influence from, which includes many other people: Francis of Assisi, Ignatius of Loyola, etc. But I continue. The publisher said the book was the first written by a pope during a major world crisis, and Ivere said it was done as a response to the coronavirus and the lockdown. For Francis, the pandemic offers an unprecedented opportunity to imagine and plan for a more socially just world. I am not a very good speaker, I think. At any rate, at times it seems he is directing that message squarely at the United States as Donald Trump's administration winds down 4 years of America First policies that excluded migrants from Muslim countries and diminished U.S. reliance on multilateral diplomacy. Without identifying the U.S. or Trump by name, Francis singles out Christian majority countries where nationalist populist leaders seek to defend Christianity from perceived enemies. Let me make something perfectly clear. Now, obviously, I am not advocating any sort of persecutions against anybody because obviously we live in the United States of America. The Constitution grants us freedom of religion. I'm very thankful for that. Thank the Lord for that. We do need to be clear, though. Islam is an enemy of Christianity, and it is an enemy of Western values. It is a delicate situation. We have to combat it in a way that still respects the freedom of peaceful Muslim people to worship. And by the way, even of non-peaceful Muslim people to at least operate in a peaceful way, right? Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, made very clear that people like Anjem Choudhury, right, they have every right to speak the vile things that they do, so long as they don't actually actively incite immediate violence. And I appreciate Brandenburg versus Ohio. even though I understand where it can go wrong, right? It makes clear that we have a very strong respect for freedom of speech in this country, and I respect that. But we do need to be honest about things, though, right? Islam is an enemy of Western values. It is an enemy of Christianity. It is an enemy of Judaism. This is just a thing. Political Islam is just fundamentalist Islam. That's just a fact. If we can't acknowledge facts, which of course we're very close to a post-fact world at this point, but if we can't acknowledge facts, there is no way we will ever be able to address problems. Quote, today, listening to some of the populist leaders we now have, I am reminded of the 1930s, when some democracies collapsed into dictatorships seemingly overnight, end quote, Francis wrote. Quote, we see it happening again now in rallies where populist leaders excite and harangue crowds. I don't know if I said that word right, but nonetheless, channeling their resentments and hatreds against imagined enemies to distract from the real problems, end quote. I'm going to have to look that word up after the show. Arranged. Anyways, people fall prey to such rhetoric out of fear, not true religious conviction, he wrote. Such, quote, superficially religious people vote for populists to protect their religious identity, unconcerned that fear and hatred of the other cannot be reconciled with the gospel, end quote. Now, we need to actually split this statement up. And frankly, I could do an entire unapologetics on this statement, but we do need to understand there is a truth to what Francis is saying, but he is muddling that truth in an extreme amount of dishonesties and lies, right? So, is it true that there are people who have religious identity that is strictly cultural, right? They're superficially religious, and their Christian identity is more of a European identity? Absolutely. Absolutely. That is the case. And especially in Europe, that is the case. It is the case, in the United States and Canada oftentimes as well, but especially in Europe, that is the case. Just to give some American and Canadian examples, though, that you guys may very well know, and even some European ones as well, right? People like Tommy Robinson, people who I even greatly respect, like Milo Yiannopoulos, like Gavin McInnes, who I also greatly respect. So on and so forth. These men, they're not, at least on the surface of things, seriously Christian. It's a cultural identity for them. And that's absolutely true. Of course, only one of those men, Milo Yiannopoulos, is a Catholic. It is also true that there are genuinely Christian men, Robert Spencers, David Woods, James Whites, who are very concerned about the threats that Islam and jihad pose both to Christianity as a faith and to Western culture as a whole, and to all the individual nations that make up the quote-unquote colloquial West. And these people have every right to be skeptical of an ideology which outright calls for their execution. See Surah 929. I won't get too deep into it because this is not the program for that, but it's just a fact, right? Also, when he says superficially religious people, let's be perfectly clear, the overwhelming majority, both of evangelical and nominal Protestants, as well as Orthodox and Catholic and Mormon Christians, if you'd like to call them that, of course, you can't really, I don't know. I guess Orthodox can be called Christians. Mormons and Catholics, certainly not. I digress. The point is, they all vote overwhelmingly conservative, right? So according to Pope Francis, he's saying that they're all superficially Christian. And, there might even be some truth to that sometimes as far as, being nominal and stuff like that. I think certain groups like evangelical Christians, Orthodox Jews, etc., tend to kind of have, much lower levels of nominalism, but it certainly happens. Big Eva is definitely a problem. Nonetheless, let's get into the article again. Back into the article, I should say. Francis addressed the killing of Floyd, a black man whose death at the knee of a white policeman set off protests this year across the United States. Referring to Floyd by name, Francis said, quote, abuse is a gross violation of human dignity that we cannot allow and which we must continue to struggle against, end quote, which of course I think is true. And like I said, I even think that there should certainly be manslaughter charges brought against Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. That's absolutely the case. That needs to be separated from these claims of systemic racism, of police going out hunting down black people, of, Black Lives Matter as an organization, which is nothing but a bunch of Marxist thugs. Right. Those issues need to be separated, because I, for one, am very firmly against police brutality and police corruption. And I will absolutely never support Black Lives Matter or anybody associated with it, because it's a disgusting organization. And I'm sorry, but I don't know how else to vocalize it to you guys, right? When you're out murdering people for defending their businesses, then I'm sorry, your organization is filth. And I highly, highly recommend that you redeem yourself and leave it before it is too late. I digress. But he warned that the protest can be manipulated and decried the attempt to erase history by downing statues of U.S. Confederate leaders, which I actually surprisingly completely agree with the Pope on. I know, weird. Dead clock is right twice a day. A better way, he said, is to debate the past through dialogue. Quote, amputating history can make us lose our memory, which is one of the few remedies we have against repeating the mistakes of the past, end quote, he wrote. I'm a little skeptical, honestly, though. I don't know if Francis actually means this, but I guess we'll see in the future. Turning to the pandemic, Francis blasted people who protested antivirus restrictions, quote, as if measures that governments must impose for the good of their people constitute some kind of political assault on autonomy or personal freedom, end quote. And isn't that just hilarious? Isn't that just the most ridiculous and naive and quite frankly stupid thing that you have ever heard come out of the Pope's mouth? As if that has not been the number one catalyst for totalitarianism in virtually every single society since the dawn of freaking time, you moron. I'm sorry. But how stupid do you think we are? Because I know for a fact that Bergoglio is not that stupid. I know for a fact that he knows damn well that every single totalitarian government, whether it's a monarchy, whether it's an aristocracy, whether it's communism, whether it's fascism, whether it's military dictatorship, it does not matter. Every single one of them at least claims to have the best interest of the plebeians in heart. Right? And you know that damn well, Mr. Francis. So, obviously, he thinks you're stupid. Obviously, he thinks his constituents, his Catholic Church, is stupid. And I fear he might actually be correct. I mean, how much crap can you guys deal with? And I'm speaking specifically to the Catholic Church, before you just say, you know what? I think I'm a part of a cult. I think that it might be possible, after the 4,000th pedophile ring was covered up, after we got caught with a 300th different murderous regime, after we continuously abuse the intellect and the good heart of our constituency, maybe this organization is evil. Just a freaking thought, guys. I'm sorry, I should not be. I know it's not, a curse word per se, but it's a filler word for a curse word. I shouldn't be saying those things, but it drives me up a wall. I don't know. I don't understand how people can be so blinded to such an obviously disgusting, evil, despicable, vile, swamp-filled, just rat's nest. Ugh. Anyways, I want to get my composure a little bit so I can finish this article. He accused some of the church and Catholic media of being part of the problem. You'll never find such people protesting the death of George Floyd or joining a demonstration because there are shanty towns where children lack water or education, end quote, he wrote. Quote, they turned into a cultural battle what was in truth an effort to ensure the protection of life, end quote. Now, of course, that's just false. Numerous people on the right, numerous evangelical Christians, numerous conservative constitutionalists, numerous conservative Catholics, numerous conspiracy theories who aren't necessarily left or theorists who aren't necessarily left or right, are always, out there, trying to help the poor, trying to help people have clean water and good food, make sure that they're not being attacked by police and things of that nature. So on and so forth. So, the Pope is just using rhetoric. He's lying because he's a dishonest. You know what? Sorry. No insults. No insults. Calling him the Ark blasphemous is good enough, I guess. I guess we all have a little bit of Smoky Saint inside us, don't we? Anyways, he praised journalists who reported on how the pandemic was affecting the poorest, but he took a broad swipe at unnamed media organizations that use this crisis to persuade people that foreigners are to blame, that the coronavirus is little more than a little bout of the flu, and that restrictions necessary for people's protections amount to an unjust demand of an interfering state, which I guess means, independent media and also Tucker Carlson, the one member of establishment media who seems to have any sort of a brain whatsoever. Happy to be your enemy, Mr. Francis. Didn't name me by name, but I guess that's basically me. So, quote, there are politicians who peddle these narratives for their own gain, he writes. They could not succeed without some media creating and spreading them, end quote. And urging the world to use the pandemic as an opportunity for a reset. Isn't that funny? It's an opportunity for a reset. Where have we heard that terminology before? I don't know. Maybe in the World Economic Forum's Great Reset? Weird. Moving on. In urging the world to use the pandemic as an opportunity for a reset, Francis offers, quote, 3 COVID-19, end quote, moments or personal crises of his own life that gave him the chance to stop, think, and change course. The first was the respiratory infection that nearly killed him when he was 21. And in his second year at the Buenos Aires Diocesan Seminary, after being saved, Francis decided to join the Jesuit religious order. Quote, I have a sense of how people with the coronavirus feel as they struggle to breathe on ventilators, end quote, Francis wrote. The second COVID-19 moment was when he moved to Germany in 1986 to work on his thesis, and felt such loneliness and isolation, he moved back to Argentina without finishing it. The third occurred during the nearly 2 years he spent, I'm trying to get this scrolled down, in exile in Cordoba, northern Argentina, as penance for his authoritarian-laced reign as head of the Jesuit order in the country. Oh, my goodness. I remember when talking about that was a conspiracy theory that Pope Francis was not only a dictatorial leader of the Jesuit order in his country, but also was working with the fascistic government that perpetrated the persecutions in Argentina and the civil war known as the Dirty Wars, which, by the way, perhaps we'll do an episode of the Watchdog on that, or maybe that'll even be good for a rabbit hole of rabbit holes. But I guess now he's just admitting it, so that's no longer conspiracy theory. That's nice. We move on. He also revealed that while in Cordoba, he read a 37-volume history of the popes. Quote, once you know that papal history, there's not that much that goes on in the Vatican Curia and the church today that can shock you, end quote, he wrote. I could not have actually said that better myself. The Pope just firmly rebuked the popes before him, even if he doesn't realize it. And yeah, no, definitely agree with that. Francis repeated his call for universal basic income, otherwise known as soft socialism, for welcoming migrants and for what he calls the 3 L's that everybody needs: land, lodging, and labor. Quote, we need to set goals for our business sector that, without denying its importance, look beyond shareholder value to other kinds of values that save us all: community, nature, and meaningful work, end quote, he writes, which is a quote almost verbatim directly taken from Marxist works. But I digress. Marxist, not Marxist, but the works of Marx, specifically Das Kapital. Man, I guess I'm getting pretty close to the hour, right? Looks like I am actually at the hour. Oh, Nicholas, that is a good point. Historical memory, including statues, etc., are important for the power base of the papacy. That is true. I would point out, though, as a caveat to that, brother, only in so much as they can control it. Which is why I don't necessarily trust that Francis is telling the truth when he says he's not okay with taking down these Confederate statues. I would, remind everyone that the Pope, or the previous popes, right, the Catholic Church as a whole, burned burned Joan of Arc at the stake and then sainted her later on, right, in the 1900s. They didn't burn her at the stake in the 1900s, of course. They burned her at the stake like 500 years before that. But then they would eventually saint her, right? The point being that, it is very true that they want, this historical memory to sort of set up their claim of having 1,000-year-old tradition, but only if they can control the narrative. So I would just advise us to be skeptical of the Pope's claims, even if we do have any sort of level of agreement with it. Shoot, man. There was some other stuff I wanted to get to, but I don't have time. So I guess we'll have to get to that on Wednesday. But that's perfectly okay. Thank you guys very much for watching this program. I absolutely appreciate you. If you thought that this was a good show, if you think that this information is important, that this stuff needs to get out, we are independent media, my friends. Not only are we independent media, but we are conservative media. And both of those things are, really difficult to get out at this current point in time. So the best way to do it is like, share, get your questions, comments, critiques, concerns, all that stuff in the comments section below. You can find my different social media accounts in the description, where I'm also going to include some links to the articles here, right? And subscribe here to the channel. Hit that bell so you can get notified when we go live. My watchdogs are the ones that go live. Unapologetics does not actually typically go live. And if you are able, and if you feel that this program is worth it, you can also support me on Patreon. That is patreon.com/thesynagogue. You can actually see that on the banner below. That, of course, is greatly appreciated, as I do aim to make this a career so I can do it full time, right? And we can get, 1 to 2 hours every weekday of the Watchdog, get much more than just once a weekend with the Unapologetics, get other podcasts up, make sure that we're just, pushing out the kinds of information that needs to be pushed out philosophically, religiously, politically, because there's a lot that needs to be discussed. And I appreciate any support that you guys give. That's basically all of the stuff that I have to say, I guess. So yeah, I appreciate you guys. Subscribe, like, comment, Patreon, social media. Thank you very much. And I have a question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? Shalom.